Sound the alarm, a crisis is about to hit China. Banks are the last safe haven for most Chinese families to store their assets. Before 2019, the expansion of the real estate bubble had already put widespread pressure on the banking industry. The Chinese economic recession following the burst of the real estate bubble once again exerted pressure on the banking system. And now China's banking industry has fallen into a dangerous situation. Since few people understand the operating conditions of the banking system, this article analyzes for readers why China's banking crisis has emerged. In short, this upcoming banking crisis is jointly caused by governments at all levels, and the financial crisis indicates that China will face storms coming and winds filling the building in the near future. A trend in the banking industry: layoffs, salary cuts, and senior executive resignations. Recently, Chinese listed companies have successively announced their first-half financial reports. Some media have discovered an important phenomenon. Banks are facing significant issues. China Fund News reported first on September 3rd, followed by Beijing Business Daily on September 4th, stating that among the total 2.55 million employees across all Chinese banks, the workforce of 42 listed banks decreased by 40,000 in just half a year, with the 6 state-owned banks reducing their staff by more than 20,000, while other medium-sized banks laid off 20,000 employees. At the same time, the average salary in the banking industry for the first half of this year decreased by 5,321 yuan compared to the first half of last year, resulting in an average monthly salary reduction of 887 yuan. 3 points need special clarification here. First, the listed banks are all leaders in the financial industry, with large-scale and wide service scope. When these leaders began to lay off employees and cut salaries, the situation for smaller local banks is likely even worse. Second, banks often pay the previous year's year-end bonus in the first half of the following year, so the salary of bank employees in the first half of this year includes that year-end bonus. Consequently, even with the bonus included, the average bank employee this year has earned over 5,000 yuan less than the same period last year, which is a clear sign of the bank's operational difficulties. Third, the 6 state-owned banks mentioned in this news are all giants in China's financial sector, with business operations covering the entire country. The leader, Industrial and Commercial Bank of China, is the world's largest bank in terms of assets. The lending scale of these 6 state-owned banks accounts for 60% to 70% of China's banking industry. The fact that they still had to lay off 20,000 employees indicates that these giant banks are facing difficulties similar to those of small and medium-sized banks. Another indicator of the financial industry's distress is that in the past month, more than 1,100 executives from listed companies have resigned, including those at the chairman, vice chairman, or general manager levels. Half of these executives are from the financial industry, and in some banks, multiple executives have resigned simultaneously. China's banks are all established by the government and controlled by governments at various levels. The chairman, vice chairman, and general manager are appointed by their superior government bodies. Bank executives who wish to resign must submit their resignations to the relevant government departments. In fact, only a small number have been approved, while most bank executives who want to resign have not been allowed to. The top leaders of the Communist Party of China are concerned that the resignation of a large number of banking executives will cause social panic and hasten the financial crisis. Now, many senior executives in the banking industry are afraid that if they continue to stay in their positions, their banks may go bankrupt, leading to personal accountability and imprisonment. As a result, they seek to leave before their banks collapse. What about depositors? Do they transfer their deposits to giant banks, believing those banks are too big to fail and will keep their assets safe? Banks have long been regarded as golden rice bowls. Now, with senior executives resigning and employees facing layoffs and salary cuts, China's banking industry is indeed showing alarming warning signs. How do banks survive? In the past 2 years, due to the continuous recession of China's economy, many small and medium-sized enterprises have gone bankrupt, and their owners have withdrawn operating funds from daily operations and deposited large amounts in banks. After banks collect a large amount of deposits, are they safe and sound? In fact, banks are not the owners of these deposits. They are only entrusted by depositors to manage these funds. Therefore, for banks, depositors' deposits are actually liabilities, and banks owe depositors. Moreover, banks must pay interest on these deposits. For banks, deposit interest is a cost. The more deposits they collect, the greater the cost. The income of bank operations comes from the interest earned from lending. Every bank must find reliable loan customers for the depositors' money and collect loan interest on time to pay deposit interest to customers. The daily operation of the bank also requires personnel and office expenses. When the bank's interest income is deducted from its interest expenses, the remaining difference allows the bank to maintain daily personnel and office expenses. This difference is what the financial industry typically calls the net interest margin, calculated as the bank's total interest income, the bank's total interest expenses, all interest-bearing assets. If a bank's net interest margin exceeds its personnel and office costs, the bank will make a profit. Conversely, if the net interest margin is less than these costs, the bank will incur losses. In the first half of this year, China's banking industry generally cut salaries because large and small banks suffered losses, leading them to cut salaries and lay off employees. When the economy is booming, there is a shortage of funds in the market, and the bank's loan interest rate will be relatively high, which results in a relatively high net interest margin. However, when the economy is depressed, the operating conditions of most loan companies deteriorate, and they cannot afford high loan interest rates. To stimulate economic recovery, the central bank will often cut interest rates to help companies reduce costs. Such financial policies harm banks, as the bank's interest income continues to shrink due to these rate cuts. According to international banking standards, the warning threshold for a sustainable net interest margin is 1.8%. If the net interest margin falls below this level, banks will start to lose money. For China's state-owned banks, the net interest margin fell below 2% in the first quarter of 2022 and continued to decline. By the fourth quarter of 2023, the net interest margin of state-owned banks had fallen below 1.5%, entering the danger zone. In the first half of this year, the net interest margin of the Industrial and Commercial Bank of China was only 1.43%. Figures for the second half of the year are not yet available, but they are expected to be even lower. If banks are unable to make ends meet and suffer serious losses, they may deplete residents' deposits to survive. Why is the situation of the world's largest bank, the Industrial and Commercial Bank of China, so precarious? There is an additional reason behind these institutional losses. It is a state-owned bank, and its funds are subject to central government control. The central government has long used ICBC's deposits to subsidize state-owned enterprises with significant losses, leading to high levels of bad debt that it cannot absorb. The Chinese Communist Party has made a major policy shift to stimulate the economy, but third-quarter GDP remains disappointing, and the housing market continues to fall. Authorities have rarely lowered the reserve requirement ratio and interest rates continuously. The 6 major state-owned banks lowered deposit rates twice in July and on October 18th. Before the stock market opened on the 21st, the People's Bank of China announced a 25 basis point cut to both the 1-year and 5-year LPRs, marking one of the largest rate cuts in history. Scholar Wang Guochen previously assessed that the Chinese Communist Party's financial system could face major problems in November, and it remains uncertain whether it can endure through this year. The Chinese Communist Party has set a target of maintaining GDP growth at 5%. It was rumored that the CCP's economic stimulus measures were released at the end of September because the GDP target was difficult to meet and the data was worse than expected. The third-quarter GDP growth rate of 4.6% announced recently is the lowest rate in CCP data since early 2023. Many are concerned about China's real economy, but issues like data manipulation may mean that even top CCP leaders are unaware of the true state of the economy.